A Muslim princess was tortured by the Nazis for months. She had all the information they needed to win the war. But she never said a word. Paris, 1943. Every British secret agent in the city was captured. All of them, except one. A 29-year-old woman who should never have been there. A woman who wrote children's books and played the harp. A woman her own instructors told her was unfit to be a spy. But this woman would become the Allies' last hope in Paris. And the price she paid for it will leave you speechless. Let me tell you a story that should be in every history book, but that almost no one knows. The year is 1940. Nazi Germany has just invaded France. Paris fell within weeks. Hitler's war machine seemed unstoppable, and Britain was alone, fighting for survival. But it had a huge problem. The British needed information. They needed to know what the Nazis were doing in occupied France, where the troops were, what their plans were, what were the coastal defenses like. Without this information, any attempt to invade Europe back would be suicide. So Britain created something called SOE, Special Operations Executive, a secret organization personally created by Winston Churchill with a single mission: to place secret agents in occupied France to organize resistance and send vital information back to London. And here's the problem. Being a secret agent in occupied France was essentially a death sentence. The Gestapo, the Nazi secret police, was ruthless. They had radio detectors that could locate transmissions. They had informants everywhere. They had torture methods that would make anyone talk. The survival rate for radio agents in France? 6 weeks. That's right, 6 weeks of average life before being captured, tortured, and executed. So when a quiet, kind 29-year-old woman, who spent her days writing stories for children and playing music, volunteered to become a secret agent, everyone thought it was a terrible idea. But this young woman was no ordinary person. Her name was Noor Inayat Khan, and her story will show you that sometimes the most unlikely people become the most extraordinary heroes. Noor was born in Moscow in 1914, but she wasn't Russian. Her father, Hazrat Inayat Khan, was an Indian musician and spiritual teacher, a Muslim Sufi who traveled the world teaching about peace, love, and harmony among all religions. Her mother was American. Noor was literally a blend of East and West. The family moved to Paris when Noor was a child, and that's where she grew up, in a house filled with music, art, spirituality, and books. Noor studied harp and piano at the Paris Conservatory. She wrote fairy tales for children. She published a book of children's stories. She worked for French radio, making programs for children. She was shy, gentle. Her friends described her as someone who wouldn't hurt a fly. Literally. She practiced nonviolence. She was spiritual. She spent hours meditating. Not exactly the profile of a deadly spy, right? But then the war came. And when Paris fell to the Nazis in 1940, something changed in Noor. She saw France, the country she considered home, being destroyed. She saw friends disappearing. She saw freedom being crushed. Her family fled to England. And it was there that Noor made a decision that would change everything. She didn't want to stay safe. She didn't want to just wait. She wanted to fight. Noor joined the British Women's Air Force as a wireless radio operator. And that's what she was good at. Very good at. She had quick fingers, a sharp mind, and an impressive ability to memorize codes and procedures. That's when the SOE noticed her. They were desperate for radio operators willing to go to France. And Noor spoke perfect French. She knew Paris like the back of her hand. She had the technical skills. But when Noor began training, the instructors were worried. Very worried. Her training reports are brutally honest. One instructor wrote that she was unstable and temperamental. Another said she had difficulty keeping secrets. One said she was too honest to be a good liar. Several instructors recommended that she not be sent to the camp. The training center commander wrote, "I do not recommend this student. She is clumsy, easily frightened, and does not have the temperament for secret missions." Think about it. Even the spy training experts were saying she shouldn't go. But there was a problem. SOE was desperate. They were losing radio agents faster than they could train them. And Noor had an advantage no one else had. She knew Paris intimately and spoke French without an accent. So, against the advice of almost all the instructors, the decision was made. Noor would be sent to Paris as a radio operator. Before leaving in June 1943, Noor went to visit her mother. She couldn't say where she was going or what she was doing, only that she would be away for a while. Her mother, looking into her eyes, sensed something was wrong. She felt she might never see her daughter again. But Noor smiled, hugged her, and told her everything would be fine. It was a lie, and they both probably knew it. In June 1943, Noor was parachuted into occupied France. Code name Madeleine. Mission: to operate a radio transmitter to send French resistance information back to London. She arrived in Paris and immediately realized she was entering a nightmare. The spy network she was supposed to work for was crumbling. The Gestapo had infiltrated several resistance groups. Agents were being captured every week. When Noor arrived, the situation was already bad. 2 weeks later, it got much worse. The Gestapo arrested almost every British agent in Paris. In a single operation, they destroyed the entire network. They captured the leaders. They confiscated the radios. They arrested the contacts. Everyone, except Noor. Suddenly, this 29-year-old woman, whom her instructors had told her was unsuitable for the job, became the only British radio operator working in Paris. The only link between the French resistance and London. The only voice broadcasting from the heart of occupied France. London sent her a message: "Come back immediately. Too dangerous. We'll extract you." Noor replied, "No. As long as I can broadcast, I'll stay." Let me explain what that meant. Every time Noor turned on her radio to broadcast, she was playing Russian roulette with her life. The Gestapo had radio detection vans roaming Paris 24 hours a day. Equipment that could pick up radio transmission signals. When they detected a signal, they triangulated the location. The longer you transmitted, the closer they got. The safety procedure was to transmit for a maximum of 20 minutes. Then pack up and move to a completely different location. Never transmit from the same place twice. Noor was broadcasting several times a day, moving constantly, carrying a 30-kilogram suitcase with radio equipment through the streets of Paris. A lone woman with a heavy suitcase. At a time when German soldiers would stop people randomly on the street to check their documents. If they caught you with a radio transmitter, there was no talking. It was immediate torture and execution. And Noor did this not for days, not for weeks, for months. For 3 months, she was the only line of communication between London and Paris. She relayed information about German troop movements, about coastal defenses, about military installations, about everything the resistance could find out. And here's the crazy part. The more time passed, the more obsessed the Gestapo became with finding her. They knew they had a working radio operator. They knew she was good. They could detect her signals, but she always disappeared before they could reach her. Noor changed apartments constantly. She slept in different places every night. She changed her appearance. She used different false identities. She was always on the move. She had chances to escape. London offered to extract her several times. Other agents begged her to leave while she still had time. She knew that with each passing day, the chances of being captured increased. But she kept going, because she knew that without her, London would be blind. Without her, there would be no information. Without information, the war could be lost. The information Noor transmitted during these months was crucial. Data on German defenses on the French coast. Information on the location of armored divisions. Details on fortifications. All of this was used in the planning for D-Day, the invasion that would change the course of the war. Without the information Noor risked her life to transmit, D-Day could have been a disaster. But there was something Noor didn't know. Someone close to her was about to betray her. October 1943. Noor had survived months longer than anyone expected. She had proven herself not only competent, but exceptional. courageous beyond measure. But 3 months living on the edge took its toll. She was exhausted, constantly on the move, barely sleeping, always looking over her shoulder. And then it happened. There are differing versions of how Noor was captured. Some say she was betrayed by a French woman who wanted the reward the Germans were offering. Others say it was the sister of another captured agent who betrayed her. What we know for sure is that someone who knew Noor sold her out to the Gestapo. For money, for fear. It doesn't matter. The result was the same. On October 13, 1943, the Gestapo knocked on the door of the apartment where Noor was staying. She was in the middle of a broadcast. The radio was on. The codes were spread out on the table. She was in the middle of the act. Noor tried to destroy the codes. She tried to resist, but there were too many. They overpowered her and arrested her. And here's where the story gets even more brutal. When the Gestapo captured Noor, they didn't just find the radio. They found notebooks. Notebooks where Noor, against all security rules, had written down previous messages, codes, information. It was a security disaster. Exactly the kind of mistake her instructors feared she would make. The notebooks gave the Germans enough information to identify others in the resistance network. The Gestapo was overjoyed. They had captured the radio operator they had been hunting for months. And now they had her codes. The Germans immediately began using Noor's radio to send false messages to London, trying to deceive the British. Any normal agent would have cooperated at this point, at least partially, for fear of the torture that would follow. But Noor was no ordinary agent. The first thing the Gestapo discovered about Noor was that those instructors who said she was soft and gentle and unsuited for espionage work were completely wrong. Noor tried to escape, not once, several times. On her first night in prison, she and 2 other prisoners almost managed to escape through the roof. They were caught at the last moment. She was so difficult, so determined to escape, that the Gestapo made an unusual decision. They chained her, hand and foot, 24 hours a day, and they began the torture. Let me be clear about what this meant. The Gestapo had methods: beatings, sleep deprivation, waterboarding, worse things that I won't describe in detail. The goal was to break a person, make them talk, make them reveal names, locations, plans. Trained agents broke after days, sometimes hours. No one judged them for it, because Gestapo torture was designed to destroy any human resistance. Noor was tortured for months, and she never said anything. Nothing. Think about it. This woman, whom the instructors said was easily frightened and highly sensitive, was being tortured daily by the Gestapo and didn't reveal a single piece of useful information. Gestapo interrogators wrote in their reports that she was extremely difficult and refused to cooperate in any way. She wouldn't give names. She wouldn't give locations. She wouldn't give plans. When asked anything about the resistance or other agents, she remained silent. The only thing Noor admitted was her real name and that she was a British officer. Under the Geneva Convention, as a prisoner of war, that was all she was required to reveal. But the Nazis didn't care about the Geneva Convention, especially not about spies. After months in prison in Paris, being tortured regularly, trying to escape repeatedly, the Gestapo decided Noor was too dangerous to keep. In November 1943, they transferred her to Germany, to a prison in Pforzheim, and they gave her a special classification, Nacht und Nebel, night and fog. This was a special Nazi directive. It meant the prisoner was to disappear without a trace. No correspondence, no contact, no official records, as if she had never existed. Noor was placed in complete isolation, a solitary cell, chained, alone in the dark, for months. This was another level of torture, psychological, designed to break a person's mind. Humans were not meant to be alone in the dark for months on end. But even there, even in isolation, even chained, Noor continued to resist. She scratched messages into the cell walls. She refused to cooperate with the guards. When given food, she sometimes threw it at them. She was chained, physically broken, but her spirit remained intact. The months passed. Noor survived the winter of 1943. She survived the spring of 1944. Meanwhile, D-Day happened. The invasion of Normandy. The information Noor had helped transmit was used. The Allies established a beachhead in France. The war was turning. Germany was beginning to lose. But Noor didn't know it. She was alone in a dark cell, with no news from the outside world, unsure if her mission had made a difference, unsure if anyone knew she was still alive. And then, in September 1944, she and 3 other female SOE agents were transferred once again to Dachau, one of the Nazis' most infamous concentration camps. The war was almost over. The Allies were advancing. Germany was collapsing. The Nazis knew they were losing. And that was precisely why they decided to execute Noor and the other agents. They knew too much. They had seen too much. The Nazis didn't want these women to survive to testify. On September 13, 1944, Noor Inayat Khan was taken to the Dachau camp. She was 30 years old. She had been tortured for almost a year. She had spent months in isolation. She had been beaten, chained, deprived of food and light. But according to records, when she was executed, her last word was liberté, freedom. She was shot in the back of the head. Her body was cremated. The Nazis tried to erase any evidence that she had ever existed. And they almost succeeded. Because after the war, no one knew what had happened to Noor. She had simply disappeared. Her family didn't know. The British didn't know. She was just one of the millions of people who disappeared into the Nazi death machine. Noor's mother died in 1949 without knowing her daughter's fate. Imagine that. She spent the last years of her life not knowing whether her daughter was alive or dead, where she was, or what had happened. It was only years after the war that British investigators, piecing together Gestapo reports, survivor testimonies, and captured documents, were able to reconstruct Noor's story. And when they finally understood what she had done, they were shocked. This woman, whom no one thought was cut out to be a spy, had become one of the most effective and courageous agents of the entire war. She had continued broadcasting when everyone else had been captured. She had sent vital information that helped the success of D-Day. She had withstood Gestapo torture for nearly a year without revealing anything. In 1949, Noor Inayat Khan was posthumously awarded the George Cross, Britain's highest civilian honor for bravery. In 1958, she received the French Croix de Guerre. There is a statue of her in London now, in Gordon Square Gardens, near where she trained. A young woman sits, in bronze, gazing at the horizon. There is a blue plaque on the house where she lived in Paris before the war. But for decades, her story was virtually unknown. While soldiers who fought in the war were celebrated, Noor and other secret agents like her remained in the shadows. Why? Because their work was secret. Because there was no glory in it. Because they died alone in dark cells, without witnesses, without fanfare. Noor was a pacifist who took up arms because she believed in freedom. She was an artist who became a warrior. She was a gentle woman who displayed steely courage. Her instructors told her she couldn't lie well enough to be a spy. But in the end, she kept the most important secrets until her death. They said she was easily frightened. But she faced her tormentors day after day without breaking. They said she was unsuitable for the mission. But she was the last agent standing in Paris when all the others had fallen. The tragedy of Noor's story is not just that she died young. It's that she died alone, not knowing that her sacrifice mattered. Not knowing that the information she transmitted saved lives. Not knowing that D-Day was a success. Not knowing that the Allies won. She died thinking that perhaps it had all been in vain. But it wasn't. Every message she transmitted. Every night she spent moving through the dark streets of Paris with that heavy suitcase. Every time she set up the radio knowing that Gestapo detectors might be approaching. All of it mattered. Historians estimate that the work of SOE agents in France, including Noor, shortened the war by months. Months mean hundreds of thousands of lives saved. Noor Inayat Khan saved lives. And she paid for it with her own. She was an Indian Muslim princess who gave her life for the freedom of France and the defeat of fascism. At a time when women were often left out of war, she fought on the front lines. In an age of racial and religious hatred, she proved that heroism knows no color or creed. Her story should be taught in schools. She should be made into films. She should be as well known as any famous general or decorated soldier. But she isn't. And that says something about whose stories we choose to remember and whose we let disappear. Noor Inayat Khan deserved better. She deserved to return home. She deserved to see France free. She deserved to grow old, write more stories, play more music, live the peaceful life she wanted. Instead, she is buried somewhere in Dachau. Or perhaps her ashes were scattered and she has no grave at all. No one knows for sure. But her story lives on. And that is our responsibility now, to remember, to tell that story, to ensure that Noor Inayat Khan is not forgotten. Because people like her are the reason we still have freedom today. They are the reason we can live without fear of curfews, without fear of knocking on the door in the middle of the night, without fear of being arrested for our beliefs. Noor fought for a better world. She didn't live to see that world, but she helped create it. And that, in the end, is what it means to be a hero. It's not about recognition. It's not about glory. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous, even when no one will ever know. Noor knew all this, and she chose to fight anyway. So the next time you hear about World War II, about D-Day, about the liberation of France, remember Noor. Remember the 30-year-old who transmitted secret messages in the shadows while the Nazis hunted her. Remember the woman her own instructors underestimated. Remember the prisoner who never broke, no matter what they did to her. Remember the princess who became a spy, the pacifist who became a warrior, the artist who became a heroine. Remember Noor Inayat Khan, because heroes aren't always the people we expect. Sometimes they're the most unlikely, the gentlest, the ones no one believed could make it. And sometimes these are the greatest heroes of all. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel for more stories about history's forgotten heroes.